pleasure to be here this afternoon. We've had a long and very interesting day, and it's a great pleasure to be able to share, I suppose, some of the things that we've been working on, not just in the yield, but within the partners and the network that we work with, because I think one of the themes that's come through today is that no one organisation, no one business is going to solve this, and we really do need to find innovative ways of working together. So I'm a bit of an unlikely entrepreneur, to be honest. I'm 50 years old, I'm a woman, and I'm not a technologist. So, how did this happen? And really, my background's international development, and I worked many years for the World Bank and the UN, using technology to help improve working standards for women, actually, in global supply chains. And the thing about international development is that it's riven with examples of people throwing money at a problem, and then when the money dries up and they all walk away, it all collapses and nothing is left. So the holy grail in international development is, how do you find the business model that actually leads to sustainable change and sustainable difference? And so in my career, what I've really focused on is really about that. There's always been technology, because I love technology, but it's always about how do we actually find a business model, and then how do we actually share data in a meaningful way to create public good with private effort. So what I wanted to share, I suppose, is some of the story of the yield, but with very much a focus on lessons learnt, and what does that mean about how can Australia really take advantage of digital agriculture? How can we actually, and I think we can, be global leaders in that, but what does that challenge us to do and think differently about the way that we create knowledge and the way that we take it to market? So that's my intention. I've been told I've got 40 minutes. I'm feeling very privileged, and that we've got 20 minutes then of a discussion. It's rare that we get so much time to actually explore some of this, so thank you very much for that. So moving on, IoT, Internet of Things and Research Impact. Really the key business problem that we're focusing on solving with technology is uncertainty. And I think a lot of the speakers today have spoken about how technology can help us get a handle on uncertainty and get further into understanding at a very hyper-local level. And the biggest uncertainty of them all in agriculture and food is actually weather. And it runs through the entire supply chain, not just on the farm. And that's really a part of this that I'm really wanting to focus on. I think there's three kind of grand challenges in ag tech. One is around uncertainty, one is around labour and cost. And obviously we've heard a bit about robotics, which is helping not only with the uncertainty problem, but also with the labour costs. And the third is about information asymmetry. And Mariana spoke about some of that today. How do growers know what the market wants? And how do we get feedback loops so that we can drive not only greater productivity, but better economic return and understanding what the consumer wants? But I'm really going to focus around uncertainty driven by weather, because that's kind of my gig, I suppose, and try not to cover the whole field. So if we look at the question of uncertainty, and we look at what the practice is, what the reality in farming and in agriculture is that back in the day, before we had any technology, people used dog rule. Red sky in the evening, red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning, red sky in the night, shepherd's delight. That was the way that people and there was some science under that, by the way, about how you would pick weather. But now most farmers, any farmer that you talk to has got a million weather apps. And I know often people say, farmers are so resistant to technology. And one of my things is actually that's because we're not very good at delivering technology that actually works for them. And most farmers, just like the rest of us, use a lot of technology every day to address uncertainty. And so really, one of the things that I think that we really need to understand about technology is that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And so if we look at other sectors where we get much higher rates of adoption, and perhaps it helps us understand where the future is actually going. And the biggest, there's actually a league chart of different industry sectors and the degree of digitisation. And at the top of it is ICT, media, not very surprising. Then it's financial markets. But at the very, very, very bottom is agriculture. So if we look to the future and understand what's coming our way, let's look at the financial market. So this is an example of a stock trading floor in the 30s where massive uncertainty, same problem of uncertainty, people trying to make decisions about bids and what to buy, and they're trying to not really got very real-time information, trying to give it the best deal that they can. And we've moved from that in an extraordinarily short period of time to this, where data is actually pulled in from around the world from a whole lot of different sources that's driving the financial markets. And in fact, algorithms are driving our financial markets. Some would argue maybe for not such great outcomes, but there is an absolute huge amount. I mean, financial sector was really the beginning of the big data revolution, if you like, and was one of the first early adopters. And this is really a sector that I think we can look to learn from. And what's really interesting about this sector is that Australia is actually a world leader in this in a way that is incredibly interesting. And so I want to tell you the story a little bit. I don't know how many of you have heard of the business called Circa. This is actually Mike, who's Professor Mike Bryce, who, by the way, just got an AO for his service to digital. So congratulations, Mike. He's out there at the back. And what's really fascinating about Mike's story and the story of Circa, which is one that we're really interested in how we can actually learn from that and apply it into agriculture, is that it's really showing how we can create a common knowledge economy that is serving not only private sector but also government, but also research. And so the story of Circa is effectively one of a research, initially a research body that Mike started, Circa, which job was trying to solve the problem of PhD students spending half their time trying to find data. Spending 75% of the time just trying to get the data. And so they got a government grant and decided to build a kind of knowledge infrastructure where they would act as the intermediary and go initially to the ASX and say, look, don't worry about all those academics knocking on your door. We'll take the data, we'll curate it, we'll give it to the researchers, and kind of everybody wins. And so what happened is they built a whole lot of technology, and fast forward, what happened is they ended up with the world's biggest financial data resource. And at the time, nobody cared about it. This is the turn of the century, about historical data, only academics who were using it to create new knowledge. But what Circa actually did is create a commercial grade knowledge infrastructure which now ingests something like 2 million transactions a second from every stock exchange in the world, and then serves that up as a commercial product via Thomson Reuters, one of the world's biggest multinationals, to the world's financial markets, something like 600 commercial clients. And then what it does is it sells it also to the regulators. So what the commercial clients use it is for algo trading. So they employ rocket scientists who sit around and create algorithms and put it into the market. And then the regulators use that same service to keep them honest. And then finally, what's happened is that they provide the service, heavily subsidised, because this is a social enterprise owned by Australia and New Zealand's 40 universities, to researchers who've created a whole new field of knowledge. Tens of thousands of publications, $1 billion in value created, and over 1,000 high-skilled jobs, all out of this one enterprise which had its base effectively in financial markets and in an academic endeavour. And so it doesn't take much imagination to go from that to think about, well, what would this look like in ag? Can we learn from this? Is the algo trader, the rocket scientist, really just the plant modeller or the climate modeller who we can give data to, who can create new knowledge that we can then rapidly commercialise in this same common model? And so I think the enormous opportunity that's making this possible, in the same way that compute and driving down the cost of compute made it possible in the financial markets, is the Internet of Things. And I'm sure you've all seen these figures. By 2020, we're talking about 50 billion devices, $14.9 trillion of value available to be had on the table. That's the size of the opportunity. And really what IoT is doing is just making it possible to bring together real-time data, and to link up devices, people, processes, information, and getting that all in one way that we can distill knowledge and actionable insight. And that's how we can look to create this return. So what does it look like in ag? Well, I think this is kind of the future of ag. This is MIT and Ag Open Lab. And what's really interesting about this is that every single one of these plants has its own IP address. So we heard Salel talk about, using robots to understand at the very individual level their experience. Well, this is the same sort of thing. Every plant has its IP address. They actually can monitor every input, the environmental conditions, the quality of what it produces. All of these things then go into a digital recipe that can be shared around the world. Now, I don't for a minute think that this is where we're going instantaneously, but it certainly gives us an indication of where technology is going, is we're reducing this uncertainty problem by using technology, by allowing us to understand what's happening, sometimes at the very micro level, so that we can customise what we do to be able to get better outcomes. So, what's that all got to do with the yield? And this is where I want to come back to sharing how we're living this kind of challenge as a business. So the Yields and AgTech business, I founded the business in November 2014, so very new. Mike was actually an angel investor and on the board of the Yield. And we called the yield for a reason, because if you can't affect this, you don't actually have a business in ag tech. And I think this is some of the theme that's been coming through today. Technology, so what? If you can't actually affect the yield or affect effectively profitability of a farm, you haven't really got a business. And technology's really got to come second. And so this very much reflects the values of our business, is that we co-create. We really focus on working with growers, understanding business problems, and delivering Internet of Things technology to solve that. And so let me share with you some examples of that. But before I do, I think Bronwyn mentioned in terms of our technology partners, Bosch, Microsoft, Intel, all global giants. Just like Mike did in the finance industry sector, we want to partner with companies that can help us scale globally. We think Australia has an enormous opportunity to be a leader in this space, but what that means is that we've got to get out of Australia, which is less than 2% of the market, and we've got to partner with very big companies that can help us do that. So in the case of the Yield, just to give you some context, we've raised something like $5.2 million in investment. 3 million of that has come from Bosch, who is our biggest sort of company investor. And we work very strongly with Microsoft and Intel and Bosch as a group to look at how we scale the technology. So our starting point was in the oyster industry, and I don't know how many people were here at the AFI Australian Farm Institute event last week. Can you just show of hands? Very few. That's great. They do say repetition is a very fine thing, but I'd much rather not be telling you something you'd heard before. So the business problem that we started with, and we often describe oysters as our entree. Our entree not only, as a food, fantastic food to eat, but also as an entree in for our business. Because really what we wanted to do was prove the business model, show how the technology actually worked, and deal with execution risk, showing how you actually execute. And to learn. And honestly, we learnt the most enormous amount, some of which I'm going to share with you today, because I think it has really important significance into how we approach technology. So the business problem we started, this is Justin. Justin is the GM for Barilla Bay Oysters. He's got 100 hectares of lease and 35 staff. He runs a fully integrated business. So not only does he grow it, he also then processes it in half shells and freezes it. He runs his own restaurant, he exports, he actually processes for other growers, and he runs a tourism enterprise, which is doing really, really well, because every Chinese visitor who comes in visits his farm because they want to know the provenance and the story of the food. And so the biggest problem that Justin was facing when we sat down and talked to him was really actually, not unsurprisingly in food, a regulatory problem. And I think this is a recurring theme in the food industry, because quite rightly, what the regulator is actually does is protects human health. And because oysters are eaten live and they are in catchment areas, when it rains and you get runoff, you get contaminants from the soil, they accumulate them and they're dangerous to eat. So what the Food Authority says is we will set regulation that says when we have runoff into the catchment area, we are going to stop harvesting, so you may not harvest and take to market. The problem is they don't have very good real-time information or granular data, so they use the BOM weather station as a proxy for runoff, and that could be 100 kilometres away, and often, not very accurate. So what we do is we put in real-time sensing into the leases where the water that the oysters are drinking. And the most important one for this business problem is salinity, because salinity is a finer level proxy. So when salinity dives, it means you've got water running off into the system. And so just doing that one thing, we can get a 30% reduction in unnecessary closures. And to give you a sense of that, a closure costs Justin between $10,000 and $100,000 a day, depending when it happens. Happens Chinese New Year, Christmas, Easter, catastrophe. So it's a very real business problem where there's a very real return if you get it right. And so not only that, but we also use the technology to actually using algorithms to predict. So not only is he only shut when he has to, but we use data analytics to be able to predict the local from the wide area network so that he can get his product out before he gets shut. And then the third kind of uplift is actually working with the regulator to adjust the actual triggers, because every catchment area is different. So the salinity trigger, if you like, is different in a pristine wilderness area compared to, say, Duck River up the northwest coast of Tassie, where you've got a whole lot of cows and dairy in the catchment area. So what we do is provide an end-to-end solution. So sensors, platform, analytics, user interface, all focused on solving the problem. If we do our job well, the technology, in fact, disappears. And in fact, if you talk to any grower around Australia, they'll tell you they've all been sold different tech. It's kind of piling up in the shed in the back because the experience never lived up to the promise. And so one of the things as a business we really focus on is how do we make the technology disappear so that the only thing that growers are looking at is really the thing that's helping them make the decision about what they've got to actually do. And so this is all platform technology that can be rapidly repurposed into ag. So in the case of the oyster industry, we consciously have a partnership with government. So both the Tasmanian government and the New South Wales government, which is the biggest growers, they take our service and they agree to use our data to do their job. And this is a really important concept about public-private partnership in digital economy. Governments never have enough money. So if the private sector can provide a data service and effectively a way of them doing their job better, they can focus on the job they should and must be doing, which is regulation. And so we have a conscious agreement with the two. So I promised that I was going to tell you some of the lessons of why this is hard. And I think one of the previous speakers spoke about the risk of garbage in, garbage out. So what's really important when you do real-time technology and data and digital ag is to really have a mind to the accuracy of the information you're collecting. Because when there's an intersection between the physical and the virtual world, and if you don't control that and understand that very well, the risk is all you've got is garbage. And this is a very fundamental point to understand. Everyone talks about let's just create a platform, let's just federate in data and off we go. But you can't do data analytics on the basis of data that is not accurate. And so just to give you a sense of this, in the industry prior to our service, the industry principally used this thing called Greenspan sensor. It's a fine sensor, but you can see there, this is an American coastal technology trial, independent trial. And across the top is 36 on the left-hand side, which is salt water. And you can see it rapidly plummeting. That's days on the x-axis. And effectively, it's becoming almost useless within 10 days. And the reason why is it biofouls and you get gunk growing on it, and so then it loses its accuracy. On the right is a sensor that we use, is a seabird sensor, which is kind of the workhorse of scientific ocean sensing. And you can see there that it's staying really highly on track to the reference dot points. And you can also see that the scale on the y-axis is much, much finer. It's 36.5 to 37 that it's staying within that range. This is really fundamentally critical if you're going to do data analytics. The next really important thing to understand, and I'm sure this audience understands it better than most, is that data by itself is meaningless. It needs to be contextualised, and you need to understand the domain in which it operates. So in this particular case, what we're doing is using the data to actually do predictions of salinity. So why is this contextual information important? Well, I was involved in a research project where we spent many millions of dollars throwing at the problem of trying to predict salinity and failed. And the reason that we failed is, first of all, we didn't have accurate data, but second of all, we didn't understand the context. So to explain that, effectively what you have about 5 points on the eastern seaboard where we collect tidal information. What we do is we offset that for harmonics, we offset it for topography, we offset it for the weather. So for example, Justin can have the difference between 5 hours and 5 minutes about whether he can get a crew out walking, because they have to walk in the water, just because of the interaction of the barometric pressure and the tide. And so when you do that, you get a tidal signature that's highly localised to every different harvest area. But interestingly, saltwater and freshwater, they have different temperature and different density, and they slide over each other. So if you measure it at one point, what you end up with is an echo of that salinity signature, of the tidal signature, which is a salinity signature. And then on the right-hand side there, you can see day one is blue. On the left-hand side, the 3 lines, it's a system in rest without a rain event. And on the right-hand side, you've had a rain event, and you can see the separation happening on day 2, which is red from day 1. And it's in that pattern that the analytics sits that we can then predict the local from the wide area. So why is this so significant to understand the domain science? The reason we failed in the research project I was previously involved in is we didn't have domain scientists involved. And so we were actually measuring every 15 minutes on a 24-hour cycle. Well, of course, the weather operates on diurnal cycles, which is 24 hours and 50 minutes, and so you have to measure every 10 minutes or you see absolutely nothing. And so it's really important to understand the importance of bringing contextual information and domain science together with digital science to actually be able to get these sort of outcomes. So this all goes into apps, and honestly, the apps we try to make as super simple as it possibly can be. But what's really interesting is that we have data in a cloud. It's not only our own data, but also data coming from the BOM, data coming from state governments. And we have 3 completely different use cases, actually with research, with the growers themselves being the primary. In effect, we have to create enough of a value proposition that they're willing to pay, that we then provide a service to government, so they're all operating off the same source of truth. And then we also provide the data to researchers to create new knowledge. And the quid pro quo for us, we do it free, is that we get the right to commercialise the algorithm that comes back. So in effect, what we're doing is increasing the efficiency and effectiveness of the R&D effort by saying, we will define a business problem, we will provide you data in a curated, high-quality form. We'll provide the technology stack. Please solve this problem for us. And then we will provide a rapid path back to commercialisation by putting that algorithm into an app. And the apps are usually incredibly simple. This is just giving you an idea. So that you can see the 3 dials there. When they start approaching their triggers, they just go orange and then they go red. So there's really just one visual prompt. It's like traffic lights. And when you go forward, all that happens is that we put a statistical cone to indicate that it's actually an estimate. So effectively, a very complex algorithm can just sit in in the back end as a rule. So why is this important? This is really how we're thinking about the whole effort of the Food Agility Consortium. And I know that Mariana spoke about this morning. So effectively what we've done is combine, if you like, the thinking that we're doing in the business part of the yield with the experience of Circa and the finance stuff that Mike did in that role. Mike is now the founding CEO of the Food Agility effort. And what we're trying to do is say, how do we replicate that at scale to make Australia a world leader in digital ag, which has the huge benefit of getting these tools quicker to our growers to improve productivity across the food and supply chain, but also at the same time create the digital exports of the future, which are the knowledge-based exports that we can and should be a leader in. Now, people often say, well, why would you do this in Australia? We're 2% of the market. And in fact, Bosch said that to me. Why would you do that in Australia? Why wouldn't we be doing this somewhere much bigger? Well, look, I think Australia is absolutely the right place to do this for whole lots of reasons. Top of is we are an extremely open agricultural system, 0.03 cents in the dollar in subsidy compared to whatever it is in Europe and the US, but certainly, in the 20-30%. Our growers are innovative because they have to be to survive. And in Tasmania, where I'm from, it's even harder because we've got to get it over that Bass Strait as well. So we're innovative. We grow absolutely everything, the only country in the world that grows everything. We actually have a very high level of uptake of technology. If you look at things like cloud, if you talk to any technology provider, they'll tell you we have very high uptakes of early adoption of technology. We also have water constraints, loss of arable land, impact of climate change, extremely high labour costs, top in the OECD. These are all very good things. You might think, those are the things that make this damn hard. They make it hard, but they also increase the value proposition, because what you want to do is have a value proposition as a business or you're not going to exist. But then as you bring it to scale, you can drive down cost and you can actually get scale. And so I think we can be leaders in digital agriculture, but I think it's going to take a concerted effort. There are some basic enablers, for example, giving access to broadband, ubiquitous broadband in rural areas, and any grower will tell you that's their biggest concern. You can create great tech, but if they can't actually use it, they've got, seriously a big problem. But I think the knowledge infrastructure is equally as important. And that's really what we're focusing on this Food Agility Consortium. Now, we have put in for a CRC bid. Frankly, I think all of us are of the view that that would be great if we get it, but that's not, we're going to do this anyway because it needs to be done. And so effectively, our vision is to empower Australia's food industry to grow its comparative advantage through digital technology. So this is really a how-to. We take it as self-evident, given truth, fact, that Australia has an enormous opportunity in food. We've had 1 million papers written on it. We've got all the white papers. We've got, China and the middle class on our doorstep, I mean, all of us, I don't want to be dismissive of that. This is incredibly important, but we know that. The question is, what is to be done? How do we actually realise that potential in a way that's scalable? And how do we actually harness the $9 billion we spend in R&D and $500 million we spend in rural development corporations in this country to actually really drive the achievement of that? And that's really the vision that we're looking at. So how have we structured this? We're really trying to think about this, and I confess to being an economist, so you've got to think about things as demand and supply. So on the demand side, there's two sort of problems that you need to solve if you're really going to achieve the value of this. First of all, you've got to produce the right thing. And this is really understanding about, and Roger's going to be laughing because we were talking about this over the break, that actually understanding what the market wants and being able to segment so that you can actually achieve maximum value is really, really important. But the second thing that you want to be able to do is once you've understood and you have insight from the market about what the market wants, and there's enormous opportunity in digital by harnessing the power of social media. I mean, food is increasingly becoming a social experience, that we can actually harness that data to provide rapid feedback loops. Just like you do with a plant model, you provide rapid feedback to growers about what the market wants. But even if you get that right, then you've also got to deal with the other demand side of understanding that the consumer cares about. And in our case, it's safe, good, high quality food. If you go to China, the best childcare centres, it's actually done that they sell food that comes from Australia that's safe to kids. I mean, it's really an incredibly important driver. So we don't want to lose that. You often hear this discussion around red tape. The issue is not red tape per se, it's the cost of compliance with the regulation. That's where the pain point is. So just like the oyster example, if we can use digital technology so that you can create many values out of the same set of data and you can reduce the cost of compliance, you kind of get the best of both worlds. So even if you get those top two things right, you still have to worry about supply. How do you increase supply? And one of the biggest things that we need is investment. And I know we heard about this morning, about the challenge of investment. There's loads of people who are interested in this. One of the issues about access to finance is risk. Bankers and financiers, what they're worried about, they're in the same business as me, which is risk. How do you actually manage risk? And so by getting greater insight and understanding what's happening in the food supply chain, you can actually get a better handle on risk, which is the condition for capital to flow. But even if you get that right, you're still going to run a farm. And I think one of the really big challenges for us is to actually scale knowledge. We see farms that are growing in size, we see investment coming in. The biggest constraint is actually how do you scale the knowledge of the person who's got the relationship with the land, who knows how to actually grow. And when you speak with people like Justin, who's this next generation, we call them the aspirational farmers. They're the guys and girls who are, a generation younger than the average. They're highly leveraged. They're producing, 27% of growers in Australia are producing nearly 72% of our food. And they're all making more than $400,000 a year. This is the group of farmers who are really trying to scale their own knowledge. And their deep frustration is they don't have the data and the access and the knowledge to be able to do that. So the idea is that we can create decision support tools that'll help them scale their own knowledge, but we can also use robotics to reduce labour costs, which is also obviously part of the future workforce. So what's in the middle is powered by digital technology, is this idea that we can create a common knowledge infrastructure, if you like, just like Mike did with Circa, just what we're doing with the yield, where that you can share data and rapidly increase the effectiveness of the research outcome, so that we can go from being, at the moment, we're the top of the league table in terms of research outcomes, but the bottom in terms of impact. And we're hoping that the digital technology and digital knowledge infrastructure can help us bridge that gap. And just as my example in the oyster industry in terms of agriculture is, it's really important to have two sets of knowledge, if you like, food science in its broadest sense of the word, including agriculture and food science, but also digital technology. We need researchers in both these spaces working together, and that's how we're going to get a much more rapid, fast outcome. So our partners that we're working with, it's quite an unusual consortium. It's very much industry driven. It's very much driven by food value chain companies. And we've purposefully tried to bring together corporations, SMEs and startups. And as we often know, that the technology is sometimes the easy bit. It's the business model that's really hard. And getting that right means that we need to have this broad range of companies involved. We also have government and regulators involved. They're actually customers in the way that I described them as food regulators. Technology and infrastructure and service providers. So from Bosch, Intel, Microsoft through to KPMG, through to Elders, through to companies that provide agricultural services, all of these sort of companies that are in the service part to the main industry, and of course, importantly, researchers. We need all working together. Now, I think we all understand that not all research should be applied. There's applied, strategic and foundational sort of research, but obviously the space we're working is very much in that applied area. So the way that we're applying that, I suppose the business model is at the centre, the customer with the business problem has to be the centre of what we actually do. And then what we're really doing is saying we're going to define the business problem, we're going to provide the data, we're going to provide the tech, we're going to get rid of the 75% of effort, which is just collecting data, and we're going to then effectively provide that to researchers who could be public and private sector, who are then in turn going to give digital research outcomes that we should then feed back in the terms of royalties for when those are actually commercialised, and it's a cycle. And this is the sort of thing that we really are focusing on. The Food Agility Consortium is really having this very focused, applied approach with a very clear customer problem in the middle of that. So we're not sitting around waiting for CRCs. Elections are very annoying things, get in the way of many of these things. We've actually started already developing this model and playing with the idea. So two projects that I wanted to share with you. One is we're working on an irrigation optimisation project with Horticulture Innovation Australia, one of the rural development corporations. The customers are Houston's Farm, who produces 70% of Australia's bagged lettuce, Harvest Moon, who provides vegetables, very big in horticulture. Because there's, the value, the gross margin per hectare in horticulture is much, much higher than it is in irrigated annuals or in extensive farming. So we've really focused in that area. And then we've brought together AgVita, which is an agricultural lab, AgLink, which is an agronomy service provider, together with, in this case, QUT, so courtesy of Bronwyn and her team, and Tristan, who's leading this project, is in the audience, and RMGCG, which is a consulting company in agriculture, together with our technology partners. And what we're doing in this project is looking at how we actually can use this technology and the yield. I should have explained, not only are we in agriculture, but we're developing a microclimate sensing system with Bosch as our research partner. That means that we can collect all the factors in a scalable, reliable, accurate way, just like we did in oysters, that drive all the models that growers are looking for in terms of the decision support they're looking for. And one of them is obviously irrigation. It's one of the biggest issues. And the biggest bugbear of growers is how much and when. And if I've got a constraint, which is a water budget or a cost budget, how do I make sure the decision I'm making is the best one? So this project is already kicking off, and we're really trialling that exact same model. How do we define the business problem? How do we provide the technology and the data that we work with researchers to help us fine-tune that, and that we rapidly commercialise it? We're looking at 6 monthly releases of apps. And this is a really important concept that we're working on, is this idea of Agile Science. Typically, what happens is research projects, are driven by researchers. You get to the end of a 3-year, cycle, and then everyone looks around and says, well, what do I do with this? We're trying to invert that on its head, actually start with the business problem, have it driven by effectively by business, and in our case, having a commercial partner baked into it, and then being able to release research outcomes as you go. Now this, one of the things that when we talk to growers, they say, look, research is so incredibly important to us, but please don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. Just give us better than what we've got, and honestly, at the moment, we have very little. And so really what we're focusing on is how do you do that in a responsible way that's clear about the risk, that has the customer as partner, that they understand it's not perfect, and that once you're improving data, you can gradually improve this over time. And so this is the model that we're working on. And the second project is in the New South Wales Oyster Industry Transformation Project, working very closely with New South Wales Farmers Association, Department of Primary Industries, Food Authority, but also in the research sense working with UTS and Department of Primary Industries that does the Fishery Institute research, and again with the same technology partners. Now Sue here is from Pambula, which is where we're just putting in the trial site today, in fact. And the issue that we have, and you remember I described the problem in Tasmania where they were using the wrong proxy, you know, they're using the proxy from the wide area data and rather than the localised data. Well, in the case of New South Wales, the problem's even bigger. They don't actually have salinity triggers to open and close from because the regulator hasn't had enough data to correlate it with the meat testing data that they can actually create the model that will tell them what the salinity level should be so that they can open and close on salinity. So this project's very much designed about how do we solve that problem. And so as you can see, both of these examples draw very much on this Agile Science approach that we're trying to bake into the Food Agility CRC. So I'm going to finish there. I'm 3 minutes and 53 seconds short of my deadline, and I'd be really happy to have any questions or discussions around some of the ideas that we're talking about.